Hello there. My name is Matt. I am a Cottonwood parent and a lawyer practicing in Denver, and I've been asked by some of the Cottonwood teachers in fifth grade to record this online presentation about the Constitution. I plan to do this in person with the class at the school. Obviously, circumstances have prevented that from happening, so here I am. I want to say that I've done this presentation many times in its live form, and my favorite part of it is generally um, answering questions from the kids. I talk, and the kids just raise their hands while I'm talking, and I answer the questions as they come up. Um, Obviously, that's not going to happen. This is pre-recorded, so I do encourage you to send me an email if you have any questions about the material I'm going to present today. My email is right there. It's mrholohan@yahoo.com. I will be happy to respond. As I said, I really enjoy answering kids' questions about the Constitution, and I'm sorry I will not be able to do that in real time, in person, this time around. So I've also been told by the teachers that there might be some missing context for the Constitution, people not knowing not necessarily why it's there or how it came to be or why we have it. And again, normally there would be that context because school would be happening in physical session, and it's not. So I will be providing a very whirlwind explanation of how the Constitution came to be, why it's there, why we have it, before going into what it actually does in our lives. So, to that end, we have this wonderful country. It's called the United States of America. It's been around for 200 and some odd years, but it wasn't always an independent country. In fact, back in the 1700s and going back a few hundred years before that, we were actually British America. That is the British American flag. We were part of the Empire of Great Britain, and we had a king. We had a king named George, and he did not live in the U.S. He actually lived in England across the ocean, and he was our king, and he was a jerk, just not a very good king at the time for various reasons I won't get into. But what ended up happening with that was that the Americans got sick of him, and they decided to be independent. So they wrote a document called the Declaration of Independence, which was basically a letter to the world saying, we are no longer subject to the King of England. We are our own country. We are America. Please respect our independence and treat us as an independent country. And that document was signed on July 4th, 1776, which is why every July 4th we eat hot dogs and blow things up to celebrate America's independence. Now, what do you think King George said when the Americans decided that they were no longer his subjects? Do you think he said, well, that's great, fellas, it's been nice, but have a nice life? He got mad. He sent his army of redcoats across the ocean to fight against the Americans and bring them back in line. And the Americans developed their own army to fight back, and then they fought a big war for many years, and lots of people died until finally the king said, fine, you win, have your stupid country, good luck. And everybody ate hot dogs. No, I'm just kidding. There were no hot dogs back then. But they were happy. They had their own country, but now they had to figure out what to do with it. They still needed somebody in charge. They didn't have a king anymore. They still needed an army, national defense, taxes, roads, things like that the government needs. So they sat down and they said, okay, well, we have this new country. What are we going to do with it? How are we going to run it? Well, the first thing they decided was they were not going to have a king. No king of America. America has no king. And so they're going to have a president. And the president is not just going to be the last president's son, at least not most of the time. People are going to vote for him. They're going to vote. People are going to vote for the president. Whoever gets the most votes gets to be president. Every 4 years, we're going to pick a new president or keep the old president if he's doing a good job. If he's not doing a good job, he will get fired, and there will be a new president. And not only that, we're going to vote for Congress. We're going to send people from our communities who get the most votes and send them to Washington to help run things along with the president. And that way, everybody who is in charge will be beholden or accountable to the voters, which means that if they're not doing a good job, the voters will kick them out of office and put new people in. That is called democracy, and that is not what they had under the King of England. Under the king's rule, pretty much whatever the king said was what everybody had to do, and that was really lousy. And the other thing they did was they sat down and they wrote a rule book, a rule about who can be president, what do you have to do to be president, and what, voting, things like that. Who can be in Congress, who can be a judge, what the government can do, what the government cannot do, what the government has to do. Rules for the government, just like you have rules for soccer, what the players can do, what the refs can do. We have rules for the government, what the government can do, what the government cannot do. And that rule book is the Constitution. The Constitution is just a document, it's a piece of paper that sets out rules for the government, for the United States government. And it's pretty long, it's pretty detailed. The print is very small in this picture I put up here, but there actually is quite a bit to it. But one of the very important things it does is it controls what rules the government can make for the people. So the government makes rules for people, right? Things like don't steal, don't kill people, wear a helmet when you ride your bike. The green check mark is getting covered up by my face, but nonetheless, these are rules, and they're very special rules made by the government that are called laws. And if you break a law, what happens? Well, you go to jail, or the government takes some of your money away or punishes you otherwise. Now, going to jail, when the government puts you in jail, it means they have taken away your liberty. They've taken away your freedom. You cannot go where you want to go and do what you want to do. You have to stay in this jail cell. You have no liberty. When the government takes your money, they're taking your property. They're taking something that you have earned, you have received, you own, something that belongs to you. They are taking that away from you and keeping it for themselves. And those are two very serious things that the government is only allowed to do for very good reasons. And again, the King of England did not follow these rules. He would put people in jail for looking at him funny. He would take people's money just because he wanted it. And when the Americans sat down to write their rule book, they said, we don't want the government to be able to take people's liberty and take people's property willy-nilly. There needs to be a good reason for it. And part of that is that the Constitution provides that there are certain things that the government cannot tell you to do, cannot make you do, and there are certain things that the government cannot keep you from doing. And those special things, the things that the government cannot force you to do and the government cannot keep you from doing, are called rights. And the Constitution protects rights. And that is one of the most important things the Constitution does. So I want to talk about some of those rights now. I know I've been very abstract, it's been very fast, I don't have a lot of time, but hopefully as I go through some of these rights, they'll start to sound familiar and you understand how this actually works in the real life. So if you have ever seen on TV or in a movie somebody get arrested by the police, you have heard them talk about constitutional rights. When the police arrest somebody, the first thing they say is you're under arrest for such and such, whatever you think you did wrong. But the next thing they say is you have a right to remain silent. And what that means is if the police ask you questions about the crime they think you committed, you can refuse to answer them. You can remain silent and you can not answer their questions. That is a constitutional right that is that protects people from being interrogated by the police if they don't want to be. And the next thing they say is you have the right to an attorney. That's me. If you get arrested, you have a right to have a lawyer help you out in the process before they send you to jail. Now, obviously, it's not just me. There are a lot of lawyers, probably more than we need, but the point is that the Constitution guarantees everybody who gets arrested for a crime, a serious crime, a lawyer to defend them against the accusations. Now, when you get arrested, they don't just stick you in jail right away because they figure you must have done something wrong. That's what the King of England did. That's not what the framers of the Constitution wanted people to do. No, they take you to court, and you have your lawyer sitting at the table with you. The government has their lawyer. There's the judge, the guy in the black robe there. There's the jury, the people sitting in that box. And the government's lawyer has to convince the jury that you're guilty, and your lawyer gets to try to convince the jury that you're not. I was imprecise there. If any parents catch me on that, I apologize, but and only if the government proves to the jury that you are guilty will you then go to jail or have the government take your money away or be subject to any other punishment the government wants to give you for the crime that you have committed. And what this right is called is due process, and a right to a trial by jury. The right to the jury and the right to the due process are constitutional rights. The Constitution says the government cannot put you in jail or take your money, can't deprive you of liberty or property without giving you this fair procedure in which the government has to give you a chance to defend yourself with a lawyer and prove that you actually did something wrong. Okay, so I'm hoping that very few of you are going to actually have to exercise these rights, and that you will not be getting arrested very often. So let's talk about some rights you may actually use more commonly. You have the right to freedom of speech. This is I took a whole course on this in law school for half a year. I'm going to talk about it for about 45 seconds here. The basic idea is that I'm guessing that some people watching this video have opinions about, say, President Trump. Some of them like him, some of them don't. Some of them like to say things like, I think Trump is a great president. Some people like to say things like, I think Trump is a lousy president. Now imagine if President Trump, or President Obama, or President Bush before him could put people in jail for saying bad things about him. That'd be pretty lousy, wouldn't it? I shouldn't have to explain why. Hopefully I don't. If you have questions about why that's bad, send me an email and I'll explain. King George of England would put people in jail for saying he was a lousy king. You're not allowed to do that in the US. People have to be able to criticize the president, the governor, the senator, the mayor, whatever government official they want to hold accountable. And that goes beyond that too. You can, it has to do with what books you can read and write and songs and TV and things like that. There's a broad right to freedom of speech and freedom of expression in the US. Whenever you express an opinion about the president or politics, you're exercising a constitutional right, freedom of speech. If you're a Girl Scout or a Boy Scout, a soccer team member, or if you're in a Fortnite club, any sort of club or organization, something you do on weekends, you're exercising a constitutional right. It's the freedom of association. You are allowed to form groups with like-minded people and pursue common interests. That is a right we did not have under the British Empire. We have it now under the First Amendment, freedom of association. There's also the freedom of the press. If you ever read a newspaper, if you ever watch the news on TV, if you ever read the news on the internet, you are exercising or you're participating in a constitutional right. And again, this has to do with holding our leaders accountable. If the newspapers and the news stories, the news TV stations and the news websites couldn't report on the president doing bad things or the Congress doing bad things or other candidates doing bad things, that would make it hard for us to have our democracy and hold our leaders accountable. So the freedom of the press to report on facts of public interest is protected by the Constitution. Now, if you go to church or temple or mosque or synagogue, if you celebrate Christmas or Hanukkah or Holi or Eid, if you say grace before eating your waffle fries at Chick-fil-A, you are engaging in a constitutional right. The government cannot tell you what religion to be, and they cannot tell you that you have to be any religion at all. The government cannot infringe upon your freedom of religion. That is a constitutional right. You, as an American, have the right to practice whatever religion you want, even if it's no religion at all. How many of you, see, if I was in person, I'd be asking that, but I'm just asking it rhetorically now. Many of you probably have a diary or a special drawer or a special spot in your closet, a special place in your computer that's password protected, where you keep private things that your parents and your little brother are not allowed to see. Now, the government cannot come into your house and rummage through all of your personal stuff. You have a right to privacy, and that is also in the Constitution, the right to keep your personal things personal and private to yourself. There's also the right to equality. The government cannot treat you differently from another person just because you're a different gender or sex or race or religion or nationality or disability status or sexuality. Everybody has to be equal in the eyes of the law. And that one is a big one. Again, you can teach a whole graduate course on that, but the basic idea is there. I think you understand it, and that has been a struggle throughout U.S. history. Just 70 years ago, I think, there were schools, public schools, that only white kids could go to and only black kids could go to. They had to fix that and say, no, the Constitution says you can't do that. Everybody has to be able to go to the same school. Finally, and I'm only really mentioning this to acknowledge its existence because I know that if I ignore it, I will get emails from parents, and if I say too much about it, I will get emails from different parents. But here it is. The Second Amendment to the Constitution recites in its entirety, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And what that means is that there is an individual right to own guns for grown-ups. Bear arms is an old, it's not like bear and arms, it's bear is an old-fashioned way of saying carry, and arms is an old-fashioned way of saying gun. So what this Second Amendment means is that there is a constitutional right to own a gun in your house. And that's all I'm going to say about it. If you want to email me questions, I will try to answer them, but this is a controversial issue, and I'm going to try to tread lightly here. So I'm going to take a breath. I have run through a long list of rights. There are many more in the Constitution. There are many other things the Constitution protects. There are many other provisions, many other things the Constitution has to say about the government and what it can and cannot do. But these are some of the most fundamental rights that we have under the Constitution as Americans. The right to remain silent, right to an attorney, the right to due process, freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, the right to privacy, the right to equality, and the right to bear arms. If your favorite constitutional right is not on here, I apologize. Feel free to send me an email and we can talk about it. At this point, I would ask, I don't know how to do this, but I would ask, if you're watching this on YouTube, just pause the video for 30 seconds after I finish this thought. The school people on the website, if you can put like a 30-second break here, because I do want the students to grab a piece of paper and write down all of these rights for an activity we're going to talk about later. Okay, now I have told you about all the rights you have as an American. Now I'm going to pull you back a little bit because I don't want you to go crazy. Please, 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 please watch to the end of this video so you understand how these rights actually work in the real world, because there are some very, very, very important things for you to know about these rights before you go out and try to exercise them. The first thing is every single constitutional right has exceptions. There is no such thing as an absolute constitutional right, okay? You have the right to free speech. That doesn't mean you can go up to somebody and say, I'm going to kill you if you don't give me all of your money. All you're doing is talking. But that's a threat, and that's not protected speech. You have a right to privacy. If the police think there's a bomb about to go off in your house, they're going to come into your house and look for that bomb, okay? And every other right that I've mentioned has those exceptions. And it's the job of people like me, lawyers, to kind of figure out what the exceptions are, how far the government can go, and actually sort of limiting these rights. But just don't feel like you can do whatever you want and then call it free speech, free religion, free association, whatever, and not get in trouble, because that is emphatically not how the country works. Second, the Constitution only controls the government. The Constitution is a rule book for the government and the government only. That means if you go to King Soopers and if you go to Boondocks and if you go to Chick-fil-A, you have to follow their rules. They're not the government. They can tell you not to say certain things. They can tell you not to gather in certain areas. They can do all kinds of different things. If it's not the government, they don't care about the Constitution. So keep that in mind. Very, very, very importantly on that subject, your parents are not the government. Your parents are the king and queen, or king and king, or queen and queen, or king or queen, or whatever your situation is, of your house. You have to do what they say. You do not have constitutional rights with respect to your parents. Your parents can tell you not to say certain things in the house. Your parents can make you answer their questions if they think that you did something wrong. Your parents can make you go to church. So don't go home, or Don't go into the next room and say, well, Mr. Holohan says I have the right to this and that, so I'm not going to do what you say. No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm telling you right now is to listen to your parents and do what they say. Can you tell I have sons? Okay. Now this is where it gets complicated. The school is the government, but you do not enjoy the full scale of constitutional rights as a child in school. And I can hear the groaning, and I can almost see the rolling of eyes, despite the fact that I'm on video here, but it's true. And the reason for this is because when you were in school, I know you're not in school now, but when you are in school and when you're doing anything school affiliated, like for example, participating in a Zoom meeting with your classroom where there are other students on and your teachers there, what the school is responsible for doing is keeping you safe and helping you learn. And as long as they are keeping you safe and helping you learn, they can infringe on your rights to make sure that everybody is safe and learning. For example, your teacher can say, don't talk right now. Don't exercise your freedom of speech in this moment in the classroom when I'm trying to give a lesson. They can say, don't say certain words on the playground. Don't exercise your freedom of speech to say certain bad words on the playground because that interferes with the safety and learning of other students. Most importantly, perhaps, the teacher can go through your desk, your locker, your backpack, your purse, your fanny pack, whatever. You do not have privacy in school. If you remember nothing else that I have said today, remember this. You do not have privacy in school. So don't think that you can bring something you're not supposed to have in your backpack, and then when your teacher or the principal or the recess lady or the lunch lady or the janitor says, let me see what's in your backpack, you can say, no, I have constitutional rights. No, that's not how it works. They get to look in your backpack, in your desk, in your locker, in your whatever to make sure you don't have anything that is going to endanger the learning and safety of your fellow students. Keep that in mind. The one thing I never want to have happen when I give this lesson is for somebody to get in trouble and say, well, Mr. Holohan said that I have rights and blah, blah, blah. Don't. Just do what you're told. Behave yourself. Now, I will say that the school cannot take away all your rights. The school cannot punish you differently because of your gender, race, nationality, religion, sexuality, your disability. Can't do that. The school, your teacher cannot get you in trouble for saying bad things about President Trump if the kid next to you doesn't get in trouble for saying bad things about Vice President Biden. Can't discriminate based on that. So here's the thing, though. If you feel like your teacher is violating your constitutional rights, don't just, have attitude about it. Here's what you do. Number one, very respectfully and calmly say, Ms. So-and-so, Mr. So-and-so, I believe I have a constitutional right to engage in this behavior. Can you please let me do it? Then your teacher will probably say, no, you're wrong. Then do what you're told. At the end of the day, go home, tell your parents, and have them call me, and I'll figure it out. When a constitutional right is violated, it doesn't mean you just get to fly off and, misbehave. There are procedures to get it fixed, and one of those procedures is hiring a lawyer to help you out and figure out if your rights are actually violated or not. So I just do not want anybody to take this lesson as a license to engage in misbehavior or defiance of authority or this or that. And again, if you have questions on that, please email me. All right. Now, I've covered a lot of ground, at least I think so, in 25 minutes. I do want to address the elephant in the room here. Now, coronavirus. Well, I just got done telling you for about 25 minutes that the government can't take away your liberty without a really good reason, and the Constitution limits the government's ability to take away your liberty. And you're probably thinking, I don't have a lot of liberty right now. With this quarantine business, I can't go to school. I can't go to my friend's house. I can't go to boondocks. I can't go to the museum. I can't go to a playground. I can't play soccer. This isn't liberty. I don't have my liberty right now. What's going on? Well, as I've been saying all along, it's not that the government cannot take away your liberty. It's that the government needs a really, really, really good reason if they want to do it. And right now we have a really, really, really good reason. We have this global pandemic where if people exercise the full extent of their liberty, they are creating a danger to other people. They are at risk of getting sick themselves. They're at risk of spreading disease to other people. Now, you may have seen in the news in the last few days where people are getting together and protesting. They're holding up signs saying, we want our freedom, let us out, end the quarantine, let us go back to work. And those people are, you guessed it, exercising a constitutional right. Freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, which I didn't talk about, but it's basically people getting together and having a protest. They have the right to engage in those protests. And that doesn't mean they're right, doesn't mean they're wrong, doesn't mean the government has to listen to them. But they're exercising an American right of freedom of speech, freedom of protest. Okay, sorry for that glitch there. I wanted to talk about your homework from this presentation, your homework that will not be graded and will not affect your life academically in any way, but something that I think is worthwhile. The one thing I really want you to understand about the Constitution, the one thing I would love for every child in America to understand, and every adult to understand for that matter, is that the Constitution can change. It is not the Bible, it is not the Quran, it is not the Torah or the Rig Veda. It is a human document that was not perfect when it was written and is not perfect now. It has been changed many, many times over the years. Those are called amendments. There's a whole process for doing it. And if the Constitution is not working well enough, we as Americans can change it, and we should change it if it needs to be changed. It has needed to be changed many, many times. So what I would like you to think about in this list of rights that I've given you is, do you think any of these rights are not necessary and should be gotten rid of? Do we not need a right to freedom of the press? Do we not need a right of privacy? Think about that. Or in addition, depending on how interested you are there any rights you can think of that people should have but don't have? The right to a job, the right to health care, the right to free housing, anything. Is there anything that you feel like should be in the Constitution because America would be a better place if everybody had that right? So either pick one of those topics, either something we don't need or something we should have, and write a paragraph about it. Now, you don't send it to your teacher. You don't need to send it to me. You can if you want. Talk about it with your parents. Talk about it with your siblings. But I want to get you thinking about how the Constitution could be better, because it can always be better. And ultimately, what we're trying to do here in this country is have everybody be safe and happy and prosperous. And if the Constitution isn't good enough to do that for everybody, we should think about how to make it better. So that's it. That's my presentation. I think I got it almost under 30 minutes as requested. Very, very sorry that I could not be there in person, but I've enjoyed putting this together for you. I do hope to get some emails from you and to have some discussions going forward about this. And I hope to be there in person next year for your little brother and sister. Thanks. Bye.